guys, how are you? If you're new to my channel, my name is Sarah. This is my YouTube channel, Stitching by Sarah. This is a channel about cross stitch. I had somebody request that I do this video. After I did my Stitch With Me, where I was working on the Holiday Express by Forbidden Fiber Co., she had asked me about my back and how I kept my backs looking so neat. So first of all, if you are somebody who has quote unquote messy backs, I am not preaching to you. I am just giving tips and tricks to how I keep my backs looking like this. Having a messy back is not, there's nothing wrong with it. The only thing that you want to make sure is that your front is, your front is pretty. Now, I have heard some people say that if there is a lot of like lumps in your backs when you go to have it framed, sometimes it's a little difficult for the framers. But if your back is messy, it'll still get framed. All right, so let me just show you first of all that I have not always been neat on my stitching on the backs. My stitching has evolved. So you see back in here, my backs are messy. I have evolved up in here. This is recent stitching, like in the last couple of years. You can see it's not as messy. But the most important part is that your front is pretty. All right. So let me give you some tips that I do. I'm using 14 count white Aida because it's easy and I can go quick on it. So first of all, the first thing I do, or first thing that I would say is a big game changer for me, is what's called the loop method. So I do that on DMC and variegated floss, unless it is highly variegated, like this floss here. If with this floss, it was definitely 2 strands together, the normal, the normal way that everybody starts. But for the loop method, you take your strand and you pull off 1 strand. All right. And you simply take your tails and you will put them together. And straighten it out. And at the end, you have a loop. And we're being serenaded by my wind chimes today. All right, so there is my loop. My needle is threaded. So I am going to pretend that I have a pattern that I'm following, and it's got some spaces for confetti stitching. Confetti stitching is just a strand or an X that is a different color than what you're stitching around it. So I have seen 2 different ways to do your loop start. I will show you the way that I do not start most of the time, and then I will show you the way I do. So I have seen people start their loop method with the strand in the front. You put your needle in the loop and you pull it. And then you go back down the whole of the second leg, or the second part of your leg, and pull it through. I have seen that done. Let me show you how I do it. All right, so I've got my loop on the end. I'm going to start on the back like everybody starts, and I'm going to go down through. I have my tail that's got the loop on it. I put my needle through it, and I'm just gonna pull until it's tight. And then I am going to continue with my stitching. Now I do the sewing method, and I do not use a hoop, Q-snap, or like scroll rods or any of that. So I stitch in hand. Some people start and end their stitches with the pin stitch. I do not do the pin stitch, but I have seen where people do it, and they have very nice backs also. So if the pin stitch is something that interests you, there are lots of videos on YouTube. You just search pin stitch, and they will show you how to do that. Now you will see sometimes I do the sewing method, sometimes I do like one leg at a time, one stitch at a time. I am not very consistent on the way I stitch, but this is how I stitch most of the time. All right, so I'm done with my little area of the pattern, quote unquote pattern, that is using this color. So to finish this, the strand, I do the normal little tail. I will go under at least 3 stitches. If I have more, then I will do that. But if I only have the 3, then I will do the 3. And then nice firm tug to make sure it's going to stay. Then I trim my tail as close to my stitching as I can. And that is the end of those stitches. Now you saw that there's a couple spots there that I left empty. We're going to call them confetti stitches. They are going to be different colors. So let's do one with the loop start. These 2 up here are going to be apricot. So I'm just going to start with my loop. And pull it tight. Now, you can do one leg at a time and then come back and do the second leg, or you can do 1 stitch at a time. Let's do 1 stitch at a time for this one. So I'm just going to do my second leg on that one. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my fabric over. See that X there? That corresponds to where your next empty hole is. So I'm going to take my strand that I'm working with and feed it underneath the other stitches that I've already done and come up just before the X. And now I will do my second X. right? So that's the end of the color that I need for right there. So I am going to again do a minimum of 3 legs, pull it firm, and then trim right at the very tail. All right, so we have another color. And this strand has already been used. I've already used it before in the pattern, and I really don't want to do the loop start. So I will go ahead and do the tail method. All right. And I usually use the tail. I don't know if you guys can tell the difference between, this one looks a little worn and this one does not. So I'm going to put the one that is a little worn underneath my stitching. That's just something I prefer to do. All right, so these 3 stitches are going to be in ash plum. So again, I am going to here's my X that I'm going to start with. So I'm going to go under a minimum of 3. Here are 4. And I'm going to bring it to the very end. I am going to hold on to the tail because it'll come through when I am making my first leg. And this time I'm going to do 1 leg at a time. I'm going to go underneath the stitches that are already done, come up by my X, and do my second with the first leg. I'm actually, since this is the end of the row, I'm just going to go ahead and make both legs of my X. And then I'm going to go back underneath what's been stitched and come up by the X. And finish my other cross with its second leg. But I have a stitch over here that's the same color. So I am going to go underneath stitches and come up to where that next stitch would be. And I do my X. And then I will finish it off under at least 3 stitches. Pull it firm, but not too tight because you don't want to distort your X on the front. And then I will trim it close to my fabric. So that is how I do confetti in stitches that are already there. Say I am doing this color and I get to a point where it becomes the confetti. So I will finish my strand. Instead of going through the ones that I've stitched, I will go through the strands that are above it or near it, where I have more strands that I can put my floss under. All right, so when I stitch my next color around the confetti stitches, they're automatically going to pull these strands underneath all the stitching. So I'm not gonna have to worry about the way that looks. All right, say you have a stitch out in the middle of nowhere. Since I have this on already, we're gonna do it as it is a strand that does not have a loop start. So we have a strand or an X right up here, all by itself. So I pull it so that there's a little bit of tail. Hold it down tight. I'm going to make sure my X is under, or my tail is where it should be. Pull it tight. All right, then I finish my X. So this point, some of you are going to yell at me and say, Sarah, don't do that. But what I do is I kind of make a knot. So I may even just take one strand of the fabric I'll do that. And then I go underneath the tail and the strand holding it down. And then I come from a different direction. So I am essentially making a knot. And I know you're not supposed to do that in cross stitch, but that's what I do. I do it 2 or 3 times from different directions. Or more, I guess. All right, so that was actually 4. I've never really counted. I'm going to pull it so it's snug. I'm also going to pull on the tail to make sure it's snug. And then I am going to trim. I'm not going to trim as close as I did over here, but I am going to trim kind of close. So that is how I do a confetti stitch with a tail to start. And then let me do one as a loop start. I think doing loop start for a stitch that's out by itself is better because I feel it's anchored better. All right, there's my loop. All right, my stitch that's all by itself is out here. I'm going to start my loop and pull it. And then I'm going to finish my stitch. And I am going to do the exact same thing where I catch several times underneath the stitches. And then I trim it down, and again, I don't cut it as short as I would over here. All right, so the next thing I will do is if you have a column, like you're doing a border, and it is just plain, you know, a straight line. If I can start with the loop method, I will. But if I can't, then I will do the tails, you know, where I hide them underneath 3 or 4 and make sure they're not showing. All right, there's my loop. We're going to do a border over here. Let's say we're going to start up here. And I'm doing column of stitches. So I did this just to pretend that maybe it is a vine that goes along the side and it's not always straight, showing you the same thing. So what I do is instead of going this way, I will actually follow up like this, I don't know what you'd call it. It's thicker. You can hide your floss in it a little bit more. So I just go underneath and hide my strand in the side of the stitching. Pull it nice and firm. And then again, I trim it close. And then you can't see where my tail is. All right. So I have actually, I recorded this video once before, but I got a phone call and it stopped the recording. So I'm actually going to do what I showed on the other video on the white Ada. So these houses, so what I'm outlining or filling in the brown. So I go down and do my stitches and then I go across, and what I do is I actually turn my fabric to fill in these other areas here so that I am not going all over the black or the open areas. All right, so let me show you what I mean on this fabric. Just because it's on, I'm going to start this one. All right, so we're going to be doing fill-in in a house that has some windows. All right, so we are going to pretend that we came down the sides and I did those stitches right here. So I am going to trace my floss back underneath what I've stitched. Now I'm going to turn my fabric upside down, and what was the top is now the bottom, and what was the bottom is now the top. And then I am going to do my stitches the exact same way that I do them when I do all my other stitches. Then I am going to finish my strand. I could either go across here or I could go down. I'm just going to go across. And pull it tight. And then I'm going to trim. So as you can see, the stitches on the right look exactly like the stitches on the left. And that is actually the same technique that I use for all the windows. I will stitch across, stitch down, stitch across, and then trail my tail underneath, flip my fabric, and then stitch, and then end my tail. I did that. Actually, what I think I did for these was I stitched across, stitched down, stitched across, came down, stitched across, came down, stitched across, and then I turned my fabric and came back and did those stitches and those stitches. In the houses, I went across, came down, went across, came down, went across, put my strand underneath behind, came up, stitched across, and then stitched two. And I think actually by that point my floss was gone. So I ended my floss and then I started over here, did those stitches, came down, went across, came down, went across, went underneath, and then I came back up. So that is how I make houses and windows. So on my Stitching in Me, pretend that's not there. What I did was I started here, I went down one, I did that one stitch, I did those 4 stitches. Actually, I did those stitch, I did those 2 stitches, and then I came up and did those 4 stitches, came down, did those 2 stitches, and then that 1 stitch, and then that 3, and then the 2. And then I have to come up to this area to do more of the vine. So right here. I did those stitches, I did that stitch, I did that stitch, and then those stitches, and then I was coming back up here. So what I did was when I was down here, instead of going from here to straight up over here and having a loose floss, I went underneath the stitches here, and then I made my 3 stitches, and continued stitching. So let me see if I can quick show you that on this one here. All right, so let me make a little bit of a vine here so that I can come on back up and continue a vine. So I have stitched this part of the vine. I'm going to go underneath or go to the back. And I'm going to go underneath what I've already stitched to get to where I want to go to. And then I am just going to finish my strand. And there we go. So that is how I actually, that little tail right there annoys me. So I'm actually going to trim that down a little bit. So that is how I stitch in order to have, I guess it would be prettier backs. And then you also got to see how I stitch using the sewing method. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. If you have any criticisms, as your mama said, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Until I see y'all again next time, bye guys.